But it's like they're just making stuff up and putting this headline and putting that out, and then people are reading it and that's going viral, and then everyone's confused. And nutrition research is hard enough as it is, because you can't lock somebody in a closet for 10 years and be like, you can only eat this and you can't go anywhere or do anything.
Right. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into the First Optimal podcast. Really excited. We got a great guest today. So we have Kristen Blake on from Kristen Blake Wellness. She's got a full team of practitioners from nutrition coaching, health coaching, dietetics. They do everything from autoimmune, hormones, gut health, all kinds of really good stuff. Detoxification. I'm sure I'm missing some stuff out. I think there's someone on your team too that works in pediatrics as well, if I said that correctly. Yeah. So we were talking beforehand. We're not really sure where this is going to go because there's so much ground we can cover, but we'll dive in and go from there. So thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So talk to us a little bit about, where did Kristen Blake Wellness come from? What was the birth like, and what drove you to kind of want to do what you're doing today?
I definitely have a common story, the wounded healer story. So I was sick as a child all the time, and conventional medicine wasn't helping me. I was told it was normal, that it was just how I was. I was getting fevers. I was passing out. I had rashes. I mean, I was really sick and wasn't able to really find any help through that. Got worse through college, got even worse once I started having kids. I met my husband in college. We went to University of Maryland together. He played basketball there. I was a cheerleader. And as I saw my kids starting to get sick, I knew I couldn't accept anymore that it just was the way it was. Everything was fine. So that's when I started to dive in and do my own research. Around the same time, he was playing for the LA Lakers, and they had just hired Dr. Kate Shanahan to become the team's physician as well as nutritionist. And she really started teaching all of the families about deeper health and nutrition. And that's when I knew, okay, this is the path that I want to go on for myself and my family. So I started doing research and was able to help get myself well and my kids well. And through that, everyone around me was going, how are you doing this? You used to be basically bedridden, and now you look great. Your kids are great. Your child's eczema is gone, all this stuff. And, you should help other people with this. And everybody wanted to know everything. So that's when I decided to go back to school. I started the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, got a health coach certification, went on to get a master's of science in clinical nutrition and human performance from Logan University. Specialized in the human performance and the sports nutrition aspect. For a little bit, I thought I wanted to get more into sports nutrition since I helped my husband a lot with his career. We saw some amazing things in his career due to nutrition through Kate Shanahan's help. And then I realized I was just really passionate about women's health and their families after what I had gone through for myself and my kids. And so I started off solo practitioner, and I couldn't keep up. I had a wait list. So that's when I started bringing on my team, and it's grown from there. And it's become even more amazing than I ever could have imagined, because now we have all of us working together and learning from each other, and everyone has different backgrounds and specialties. We have an RN, we have an RD, we have 2 health coaches. And so we're all able to work together to really get the best outcomes possible for our clients.
Yeah. And it's always really fun, especially, as you're mentioning, I'm not sure if the recording was on when we talked about this, but like working with people, across the US, or like in my case, I do have some people overseas as well that we kind of interact with. But it's really interesting to see some of the commonalities between different cultures or different areas of the country of issues, and then also to see some of the unique problems and or the unique approaches to solve some of these problems. So when you mentioned the team, that's just kind of where my mind went, that having just such a mixture of different backgrounds helps put it together. Because I think that's one of the things I often hear from clients. They want to know, like, the one person they're working with, and I totally get why, but they're like, what are their credentials? I'm like, that's a great question, but like, this is a little different approach. Like, you're kind of working more with the team. And it sounds like that's a lot of the experience that people get when they interact with your group.
Yeah, when clients come in, I always meet with them first and we do a really deep dive into their medical history, their health history. From there, I'm able to select what I think is going to be the most optimal team for them. And that might look like our RN, Christine, who's amazing with hormones, and our RD, who is really good with figuring out what is the best nutrition path to partner with this person on their hormones. But then every Monday, we have a weekly team meeting where all of us sit down and we run through every case and we make
Mhm.
sure that no stone is left unturned. We make sure everyone's collaborating. And it's one of my favorite things that I do every week because every week we're learning from each other. New research that just came out that one person might have read, but another one hasn't. So we're able to share on that and have that team approach. And it's so much fun.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people out there, like it's something I try to encourage people with if they're looking for a company to interact with for their health, whatever, in our case, it's, much different than what you guys do, but there certainly is a lot of synergies and overlap. But I always encourage people like ask about the process because a lot of times people are like, trying to like stump somebody when they're talking to them about a certain therapy or do they really know what they're talking about? But I
Mhm.
really find it unique because you said something there about like the case studies, because that's something I've learned to ask about in different capacities or different ways where I'm looking for help is how do you guys come up with your solutions? What is your process? Like what do you do? And I that's a really key thing I just want to point out to the audience out there. If you're looking for a practitioner and they do case study reviews, that is like hugely impactful and it's a true investment of their time of that organization, like of what you're saying, committing to their best care because that's not a revenue generating activity. Like they're not, they're not making money during that meeting, but you have all these brains coming together just to look at your individualized case and poke holes at it. Cause that's one of the favorite things over the years I've been a part of. Even way back when I started in the on the training side of things, like just, hey, this guy came in, his hips are this way, and his knees, he's got this back pain here. Like, what would you do? And it's just fun. And I think that you can pick up on that culture, during an intake. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that's really cool that you guys do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh, I did want to. I had a kind of a squirrel moment because you brought up sports performance
Mhm.
nutrition, and that was originally how I first got into kind of the general, health stuff. And I used to tell people like, well, I don't really do these things because they're healthy, even though they were. I said I just do them out of vain. I want to perform better. When I was
Yeah.
younger, I wasn't quite worried about all the health stuff. And obviously that changes as you get more mature and look at life a little different and progress. I'm curious to if there's any threads you've seen in the sports performance world that you can apply to like the general population, because there's a couple that really intrigue me, but I'm just wondering if have you ever done that, like reverse engineer some of the more advanced, if you will, stuff for like performance to like general population person, and could you give any examples of what comes to mind there?
Yeah, well, the same, and I do work with an NBA player currently, and the same, and I've been working with him for 4 years now.
Okay.
Same things that I used with him initially, we use with our 40-year-old women.
Yeah.
Things like the Aura Ring and HRV tracking and monitoring your sleep and your body stress response. And for him, like you said, it's a different outcome. So he needs to be able to train at his highest capacity, avoid injury, avoid getting sick. And for women, they have their own performance things that they want to be able to crush, whatever that is. So we use a lot of the same data points, a lot of the same labs. We use with athletes, we'll use a micronutrient test to see are there any holes in their nutrition or gaps? Does their body, need more of anything? I use that with our private clients as well. So really, we use a lot of the same tools. It's just for a different outcome.
Yeah, I find it interesting, and this is going to be a really obvious one for those out there and much, much more basic than what you're describing. But like the aha moment so many people had with creatine that we
Yeah.
had, in the early 2000s, we're like, yeah,
Yeah.
duh, or in late 90s, it's like, yeah, we know
Mhm.
what this is. And
Yeah.
now it's like, grandma's having creatine, doing a creatine load for, cognitive performance or what have
Yep.
you, or cognitive
Exactly.
health. So yeah, it's really interesting to see. And I'm curious, and again, I'm going to paint with a broad brush with a lot of my questions. So for everybody out there, there's the devil's in the details, a lot of nuance, but just for the sake of discussion, I'm curious about like the micronutrients, deficiencies. I guess the way I'd frame it first is what do you primarily see in athletes, and then I'll get into some of the follow-up questions on that. But what are some common things you see as like, even some of these high performing people, very gifted folks in their respective discipline? Like, what are some micronutrient deficiencies you're often seeing?
Amino acids, they tend to burn through those really quickly, and it's
Mm.
hard for them to get enough. Vitamin D, because they are inside all of the time. So
Oh
their
yeah.
vitamin D is always low. My son is a college athlete. I have two other athletes that are in high school. So our whole family is athletes, and they all play basketball. So I joke they're vampires. So they're
Uh,
inside all the time. They get no sunshine. And they're doing their best to keep on top of their nutrition, but it's hard because they're in the gym and they're training constantly. So it's really hard to make sure you're staying on top of everything. Something else somewhat related to what you were saying, but a little bit of a side note, is intestinal permeability.
mm,
So athletes have very leaky guts, and we know from studies that high intensity interval training will exacerbate intestinal permeability. We also know that ibuprofen usage is going to do that. While
mm,
they're sore, they're getting injured, they're taking ibuprofen, they're training at a really high level. So they have very leaky guts. So then you can end up seeing what looks random and haphazard with these micronutrient deficiencies, but really it's due to intestinal permeability and some gut issues and some absorption issues. So we always want to make sure we're working on digestion and improving that, and make sure you chew your food and take your digestive enzymes if you need more support with that, or maybe even HCl and things like that, to make sure that they're digesting properly. And then whatever we can do for gut healing, we will often do that. So we'll be monitoring zonulin to see how much intestinal permeability we have. We'll be utilizing things like glutamine or aloe to really help heal that gut up, and then avoiding ibuprofen if possible. There's times where it's needed, but you don't want to take it like candy every single
sure.
day. Yeah, does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. No, it's great. So I'm curious to stick on the athlete side, and I do want to get to I'll get to the other side, but in relates to gosh, a couple things you said there. So that's great input. With when we're talking about gut permeability, and I just want to ask a follow-up to the ibuprofen part. So do you see any utility in like a curcumin or some other kind of alternate method of anti-inflammatory therapies that you use with athletes, or are they just not strong enough compared to an ibuprofen and it's just not applicable? Like, how do you wrestle with that? It's not really my area of expertise. I just kind of, um, have played with it here and there myself, just being banged up, thinking I'm still an athlete in my mid 40s. So just curious to what your experience has been with some different, if you do use different therapies, or
Mhm.
what is your go-to?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. One, I forget the exact study of the year, things like that, but they did study curcumin in marathon runners and went head to head with that. No, I'm sorry, it was tart cherry juice. They say tart cherry
Okay.
juice in marathon runners, and put that head to head with ibuprofen usage, just for muscle soreness. And they found that it worked just as well.
Hmm.
So I do like tart cherry juice, and I do like
Okay.
curcumin as well. But those are more, I think of those more of like a preventative thing to kind of keep that smoldering fire under control.
Yeah.
So curcumin, and we want to be careful we're not going dosage that are too high or for too long, or not monitoring liver enzymes, because AST and ALT in certain people can be elevated if you're using curcumin way too high for way too long. So everything has pros and cons, but using it in a more moderate dose, using fish oil as well, which is anti-inflammatory, on more of a daily basis with that tart cherry. I like to do tart cherry, dose that at night, because it also can help increase melatonin production. So I'll have my athletes doing fish oil and curcumin during the day, and then tart cherry. You literally can just do a shot of it at night before bed, and it's going to
Interesting.
help with muscle soreness as well as help you sleep better. And then if you sprain your ankle and it's the size of an elephant, you might want to go in there with some ibuprofen, but as infrequently as possible, and leaning more on those daily preventative things.
And what generally, like, what no, the tart chair, I've never seen that use. So that's definitely interesting. It's definitely something I wrote down because I want to look into that further. That's awesome. That's a great nugget there. With that, when someone is using ibuprofen, let's say there's some gut issues you're finding from a GI map, and for those who are listening in, there's a lot of things we can tell from a GI map, as Kristen's mentioning, but you were talking about permeability, things of that nature. Generally, how long do you see someone with some gut issues that you associate with, let's say, overusage of like an ibuprofen? How long does it generally take, to put together a protocol to try to clean some of that up and kind of get it back together? And then I'm curious, like, what do they report? Like, when do you know that's cleaned up? Is it a follow-up test only, or is there some kind of symptom feedback you look for?
Yeah. So depending on how bad it is and what else is going on, if their GI map looks beautiful and the only thing was they abused ibuprofen and they've got some intestinal permeability and their zonulin is high, that can probably be fixed in 3 months or less. And I would retest the zonulin at the end of that treatment to make sure that it went from
Mhm.
500 to 100 or, moves in the right direction. But we also do track symptoms, like you said. And we have a symptom tracker that our clients take, and we send those out every couple of months. And we're able to monitor that numerical value. And we want to make sure that that's moving in the right direction. And the thing with your gut is that your symptoms can be all over the place because your immune system lives in your gut and your neurotransmitters are produced in your gut, and your gut impacts your nutrient absorption, which then impacts your thyroid and then impacts your iron absorption. That impacts fatigue. So it can be all over the place. So rather than looking at, oh, did your stomach hurt before and does it not hurt now? Because that typically is not how that follows along. We
Right.
look at all of the symptoms. We want to see all of the numbers going down, and then have conversations with them getting more specific. We also send out monthly surveys where we ask them, what is new? What is going on with you right now? What do you need support with? How are you feeling in general? So we're getting data where they're able to describe what they're feeling, as well as that numerical value to track. And then we're getting on calls with them twice a month, every month as well, to dive even deeper. So we like to collect a lot of data points, as you can tell. And by the end of 3 months, we would like to see, again, if it's, just a little bit of leaky gut, that should be resolved. If there's something deeper, if there's IBS or IBD or microbiome imbalance, things like that, sometimes that's going to take a little longer to clean up because you might need to rebalance the microbiome first or kick out some bad bacteria that's overgrown first and then move on to the gut healing. So that might take 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I wanted to ask a follow-up with men specifically, and maybe this is just my experience, so I'm going to make his men sound bad. Um, but it does seem like we often were, including myself, I had an experience in my early 30s where I thought it was normal that if I happened to not eat, the cleanest food, to just be hunched over in pain in my stomach. Like, I just thought that, oh, this is just, I didn't have great food. It was, I had a piece of pizza or whatever. And it turned out, I had some other issues. And one of them was just a really high sensitivity to gluten and some other things bacterially that were off. But I'm curious, if you could talk maybe a little bit about how a lot of men will come in, at least in my experience, or guys I talk to, and they'll say, "Oh, no, no, I don't have any issues. I go to the bathroom regularly," whatever. And that's like their only measurement of gut health.
Mhm.
I guess A, do you experience that? And B, like, what are some other questions and or dialogue you have to open up their minds to engage with some of this testing and to dive into it? Because there's a bunch of reasons why, in my mind, I know now, knowing what I know, but it is for those who don't know. How do you approach that?
Yeah, where our intake questionnaire is very long, and the gut portion is pretty long as well. And so it asks not just, do you go to the bathroom every day, but is it watery? Is it difficult to pass? Do you have full evacuation? And then when we get on a call, I will sometimes even share the Bristol stool chart. So we're looking at, like,
Yeah.
what does it look like? And men, I find in particular, are very uncomfortable talking about it at first. And I'm like, no, no, it's fine. This is what we do.
Yeah.
We talk about poop. So tell me, is it rabbit pellets? Is it loose? Like, let's get into it. And then once they realize it's not a big deal to me, they're like, okay, fine, we can talk about this. So I feel like a lot of people are good at normalizing their symptoms and gaslighting themselves, because also they've experienced this for so long often that they don't realize it's not normal. And I hear that a lot from people after they've been working with us for a couple months. They're like, I thought I felt pretty good. I
Mhm.
just thought I had a little problem over here, a little over there. I didn't realize how bad I felt. I didn't realize how sick I was until now I'm on the other side looking back going, oh my goodness, I can't believe I thought that was okay to run to the bathroom every time I ate something, or to feel like I'm doubled over in pain after I have ice cream. Like, I just thought everybody had that because no
Right.
one's talking about it. They're kind of hiding it and just thinking it's normal. So that's a really rewarding thing, is to be able to show somebody their life can be so much better than they ever imagined once we
Right.
dive in there, figure out what's going on.
One I found too is some, at least it seems, admittedly, I'm not a clinician, so I don't have like, it's more anecdotal, but like once they've told me, it's just their feedback, but once their gut was performing better or, cleaned up, if you will, their inflammation went down, joint pain, things like that. Cause
Yeah.
a lot of guys I train with, they had the bright idea, like me in our 40s, that to think we should start jujitsu with a bunch of 20-year-olds. And so we're all banged up, rolling
My
around.
husband
And
as well.
okay, there you go. So join the club, right?
Yeah.
So there's something with those old guys in jujitsu. I don't know. We blame a few podcasters out there that got in our ears. But yeah, so I just noticed like that went down. Is that something that you find as well? And is that also like a data point that you try to look at as far as like other parts of the body and how it's responding?
Yeah, definitely. Inflammation is huge. We see a lot of inflammation reduction, both in numbers. On the GI map, we see calprotectin as a marker of inflammation in the gut. And then more systemic, like HSCRP, or high sensitivity C-reactive protein. We want that to be less than 1. And
Yeah,
sometimes that's 5 and above. And then we clean up the gut and it goes down to less than 1. And then people often report joint pain specifically, as something that improves once the gut health starts to improve. When you think about your gut, and if there's intestinal permeability, that's supposed to be like a brick wall or a mesh kind of sieve, not this
sure.
big chain link fence. And when that has a lot of opening and the immune system lies right beneath that, if it's coming into direct contact over and over again with things that it shouldn't be, it's going to kind of freak out a little bit and send
Mhm.
out this friendly fire. And there's a lot of inflammation that comes from that. And that's going to be felt a little bit differently for everybody. But I think you're absolutely correct when you say the inflammation can go down when you start fixing the gut.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And that's the thing. I just really hope, for everyone's sake out there, like they're looking at these things and finding clinicians like yourself and your team that, dedicated a lot of time and education to know how to do these things to fix it, because it's just, yeah, it's a big game changer. And it's interesting how many, people make those wrong. I don't want to say wrong, but they don't connect the dots, I guess is the best way I could put it.
Yeah.
Um, but transitioning a little bit to kind of general population, maybe not as active folks, when they're coming in, what are just the same line of the first question, similar to the athletes, are there any micronutrients that are common in kind of everyday general population that you're seeing that maybe some people should give reason for pause to say, hey, I see this enough that maybe you might want to check this, or maybe if you're having a symptom, this might be going on. Are there any things that come to mind with that?
I see a lot of issues with iron, more than you would think. That you would think that'd be caught a little bit quicker and easier, but in my opinion, it hasn't been for some reason. So we have just countless people coming to us that are really tired, and they're like, "But my doctor said I'm fine," or "My doctor ran a CBC and a CMP, and they said I'm fine." Or maybe they ran just iron, but they didn't run iron saturation,
Mhm.
ferritin. Like, they don't go deep enough. And when we run all of that, we see a lot of iron dysregulation, where sometimes the iron, which is, free and circulating, that might look okay, but the ferritin, the storage form, is like 6 and it should be like 60. So
Yeah.
I often see that really low, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The most common ones I see are H. pylori, which is a bacteria in your stomach that can impact iron absorption. It also can lead to ulcers and stomach cancer. So it's really problematic for multiple reasons, but that's a key one. Hypochlorhydria, or low stomach acid, also is going to impact your body's ability to extract the iron from the food that you're eating. So you might be eating plenty of protein, but you're not getting it out. Some other reasons for low ferritin could be celiac. We've caught a lot of undiagnosed celiac. Again, people were told, "You're fine, your CBC looks fine, go about your day." And then we run deeper labs, and then we send them for testing, and lo and behold, they're diagnosed with celiac. Uh, I could go on and on about low iron, but
Yeah.
we see that all the time, and people are so tired. And sometimes women are struggling with fertility. Sometimes their hair is falling out, and they have all these horrible symptoms, and no one is really looking at it. And it's really fixable once you figure out what's going on and kind of reverse engineer it from there.
And are you seeing it primarily, would you say more in women, the iron deficiencies, or is it a mix or?
More in women, yeah, and women also are losing a lot of blood every month with
Mhm.
menstruation, and so it's harder for their bodies to stay on top of that. Men, sometimes we have caught hemochromatosis,
Yeah.
which is when the iron is too high,
Mhm.
and that's been missed in a good handful of the people that have come to work with us as well, and we'll use not only in blood work iron study, but also genetics, because there's a gene, the HFE gene for
Yep.
hereditary hemochromatosis, that we can look for. So that's often missed as well. So iron being too high in men and too low in women.
Yeah, I was now of course I'm gonna draw a blank on it. My own stuff I can't remember, but I could rattle off 20 other people's cases. Is it 2 of the mutations for hemochromatosis? Is there 3 total? I'm trying to remember if I have 1 of
There's
the
like some
2.
main ones, and there's kind of some fringe ones too that are less
Gotcha.
common, but there's actually like a whole host of them.
So my main thing was essentially, what I found personally, I just, I my liver enzymes were high, my ferritin was really high, and
Mhm,
something else, one of the iron markers. No, this is like 4 years ago. Short of
mhm,
the long, while I was working with my primary care, because I got it at some functional testing I did, and just happened to have a physical. My primary care was like, "That's interesting. Let's pull for this and that." Turns out I
mhm.
had it. I didn't have to do any therapeutic phlebotomies though, because like the way I prep my food, I had a massive iron skillet and I would just load it with a few pounds of
Mhm.
meat every day, basically. And
Yeah,
my thing was like meat and rice, like 3 of my meals a day were just that,
yeah.
like simple, easy. And when I swapped that, I just I just thought I didn't research it, right? It was never an issue
Mhm,
for me. I never really ran into it much personally. Like other
yeah.
people I've worked with or on different teams I've been on did. And I'm like, "All right, I'll give this a try." And sure enough, by the time the physical was not that much further down the road, I had it done
Mhm.
and everything was, like, back in line. And so
Yeah.
since then, I just monitor it and
Mhm.
it seems fine, but I can, speak to that from personal experience. Just, finding out, like, how high it was pretty alarming, and
Yeah.
gosh, who knows if I would've just went to the standard physical, best of intentions to monitor my health, but I could have had that going on for 10 years, 20 years,
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
something more problematic popped its
And
ugly
that's
head.
actually one of the recommendations we make to women with low iron is cook with a cast iron skillet, but we
Right.
also tell them, don't feed your husband the same thing
Mm.
unless he's also being monitored, because we don't want to fix her problem and then create a problem for him if he's not working with us and not being monitored.
Yeah, no, and I found that really interesting too, how you're talking about, you know, the absorption in the gut relative to that, because I do think, there's a lot of markers I'm sure we could unpack that on a general panel look fine, but then when you look a little deeper, like you were saying, the absorption, the things of that nature aren't really necessarily there. So I think that's a big one for people. Do you see that bleed over in like thyroid function as well? If there's some kind of iron deficiencies or imbalances, do you see that in other areas as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's going to impact their ability to have enough selenium coming through. B vitamins are super important for thyroid function. And, they can be sitting there eating the Brazil nuts, but if they're not able to like really get that selenium out and have the cofactors to escort it through the body and get it where it needs to go, then it's not going to work. Another thing with thyroid and gut health is your TSH is your pituitary telling your thyroid, hey, we want you to make thyroid hormone. Well, it's going to make T4, but then that T4 needs to be converted to T3, and then that's the usable form. That conversion of T4 to T3 happens mainly in 2 places. One is the liver, and the other is the gut. So if your gut isn't working right and everything is off in your gut, then you're going to have issues converting your T4 to T3. So then you're not going to have as much of that usable hormone that your body actually runs off of. And then we can see symptoms of hypothyroidism from that. And then if we actually, run the full panel, which we always run the full panel, we run the
Right,
antibodies as well. Everyone's just getting their TSH, and that's missing these problems 5 years before they become something that would
right.
be caught on the TSH. And that's something we see really often is maybe an appropriate level of T4 and maybe an appropriate TSH. However, the T3 might be really low. And then we know we need to look at the gut function, liver, things like that.
In a lot of cases, this is more of a curiosity. Do you see like some form of correlation, or maybe it's every time? I don't know. Where T3 is low, are you seeing reverse T3 is really high in those cases, or is it just depends? Like sometimes it's just not existent, or what are some things you see with in regards to like reverse T3?
It's not as common as you would think to have high reverse T3. We absolutely see it and we absolutely run for it because we want to screen for it. But I've found the correlation with people with high reverse T3 is like I could figure that out without even testing it. You know, from
Sure.
meeting them, they're high strung, they're very stressed, they are like going through it. Everything is really intense. And so I'll tell them ahead of time, like your reverse T3 is probably going to be high, but we're going to look at it and then we can fix it. And those are also the type of people that don't really want to focus on that. They're like, I'm not meditating. I don't care about my stress levels. Just give me some supplements. And I'm like, I mean, we can give you stuff, but you also need to calm down. And then we have to talk about your lifestyle. And then we'll often pull in a Dutch to look at the diurnal cortisol pattern when we have that really high reverse T3. We either have already run them at the same time or one or the other, but we bring those all together because we often see that the cortisol is crazy and it's maybe flatline during the day and really high at night, and then they're like, I can't sleep. I'm like, well, of course you can't. Your cortisol is through the roof. You need to calm down at night. And yes, we can do things like phosphatidylserine to lower elevated nighttime cortisol, but you also need to calm down and have a better bedtime routine. So those are the types of people with high reverse T3. I don't always see it high when T3 is low, and those other cases is where I think gut and liver.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And for those out there that may not be as familiar with reverse T3, do you mind sharing just a kind of a brief overview, like what it is and how it can cause some of these manifestations and like, what you're seeing when you're talking to them?
Yeah. So again, when we have that T4, it's supposed to convert to T3 and that's usable. I tell people it goes oops and it goes the wrong direction when it goes to reverse T3. And that is not going to be that nice, healthy, usable T3 that we want to be able to have healthy hair, skin, nails, bowel function, energy, and moods. It's just floating over here where we can't get to it. And it's often really high when we have really high stress levels, which is why we want to look at more systemically and holistically what's going on to cause that. And it's not always psychological stress. Sometimes it is physiological. So
Mhm.
sometimes the person is very zen. I'd say that's more rare, but sometimes they're like, I meditate, I do breath work, I'm calm, like I don't feel anxious at all. But we find crazy infections either in their gut or maybe it's reactivated Epstein-Barr, and they might have H. pylori and E. coli or parasites, whatever. And so their body is really stressed. And so that's creating this elevated reverse T3 as well.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's interesting, the importance of people because to look at the full picture, work with someone like yourself that takes the time to look at the full picture because yeah, I'm just kind of processing what you're saying there. Like there's so many working parts there. I'm curious with kind of general population, they come in, their exposure with testing has been like the basic, physical every year from their primary care. Um, what does it look like when they come into you with some of these symptoms or issues? They're committed, obviously, they filled out all the input. What is your initial approach? Because I would imagine for some, it can be very overwhelming, all the information they can get from all these advanced diagnostics. So I'm just curious, like, how do you decide, or you and your team, to piece together which tests, when to do them, et cetera? And again, I know I'm painting with a broad brush, but just kind of curious to your process and your approach, because I think it can help a lot of people, maybe if they are feeling a little overwhelmed because we're using terms or words that they may not be as familiar with. I'm just curious to like what your approach is and how do you kind of walk someone through that journey?
That's a great question. I love that you asked that. And I think that's something that we do really well is meet people where they're at and see what are they ready for and what are they not ready for. And so some people will come in and they've been following me on Instagram for 5 years, compiling lists of labs they are so excited to have done. And they sit down and they're like, I want everything. I want you to look at everything and do everything. And we're like, okay, let's go. Let's dive in. And then other people have kind of slowly come to me. Maybe their best friend told them, you've got to go see this girl. Like, I know she can help you. Even though your doctor said there's nothing wrong, I know she'll find it. And so for them, we'll start where what is the most important lab that I think after I've talked to them. If I'm like, yeah, we really need to run blood work to start. And we'll just start there. And then we let that inform the next step. We let the conversation with them inform our next step as well. So I'm doing the intake and I'm kind of figuring out this is where we need to start. And then I'm putting together my dream team. They're meeting with them weekly, bi-weekly, and then we're all as a team meeting to stay in touch with us as well. So along that process, we'll get to a point where we say, okay, we just got this blood work back and we actually saw that her ANA is elevated, which is a marker of autoimmune disease. And so then we can sit down with her and say, okay, this showed what we were thinking it did. And so now we want to go a little deeper. We'd like to look at your gut because gut health is very important for autoimmune disease development as well as symptom reversal. And then, are you good with that? Yes. Okay. Then we order that. And then often from there, we'll go deeper if needed. So sometimes they're better like that from a couple sets of labs and dietary interventions, especially if they were eating really poorly before and not sleeping at all. And, all the things, those are easier fixes than somebody that's been doing everything right and they're still not getting better. Then we'll pull in maybe a toxin panel to see, are they living in mold? Do they have really high amounts of heavy metals, which we see often in people that have joint things like RA. I worked with an Olympic shooter who was debilitated with RA to the point where she was losing her career over it because she could barely bend her hands anymore. Well, she breathes in heavy metals all day with what she's doing with the guns and the bullets and the gunpowder, all those things. And so when she got to us, she was very sick. Her CRP was over 60. And again, we want that less than 1. So her CRP was over 60. Her labs looked terrible. And we fixed her gut. We fixed her nutrition. We got her sleeping better. She was in so much pain when she came to us, she couldn't sleep. So she was taking just buckets of ibuprofen because she was in pain. So we fixed the pain. We fixed her sleep. We fixed her gut. And then we pulled in that toxin piece with the heavy metals. And we started doing some very gentle chelation, nothing crazy, but binding to the metals, getting those out. She then was able to return to her career. Her ANA, her CRP went from over 60 to 3 over the course of 6 months. And we were able to give her life back. But we had to baby step her through that. She wasn't ready for everything all at once. So we love to meet people where they're at and pick the most important lab first. And then that data can inform the rest. Unless people, like I said, sometimes they come in, they're like, I want everything. And they're super excited. And we can do that too.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think a lot of people, that just as you're describing that, just to point out something, let's say the Olympic shooter was shooting for, I'm making this up, 15 years, 20 years. So to take 6 months to undo and maybe there's other things too that cause some of these issues along with that or whatever the case was, but people to understand it's not the same. And I don't say this to be condescending, just to kind of like register, because I'm like this too, where it's like, I'm tired, I'm gonna go get a coffee. All right. And then I'm not tired anymore. I have this issue, my hands, I'm gonna go, what's the thing I can take? And then my hands will be better. It's like, well, the thing you can take is 6 months of therapy and figuring out and walking step by step through it. So but the good news is, like, and that's what I try to share with people, even if it's not through anyone I'm affiliated with. I'm like, the good news is there's not many things we don't have some kind of solution to. You just have to stay in the fight long enough to work through some of these things. Like it's really strange. And I'm curious how you feel sometimes, because I'm like, good news, bad news. Like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, good news, if I had a friend or something, like, you invested in this advanced diagnostic testing. The good news is you have nothing really wrong in this. The bad news is you have nothing really wrong, so we have to do more testing. So it's kind of, sometimes it's like this mixed message they're getting. But I do think that, as I was saying, the key to walk through each step of that process, because it does take time to kind of unravel that. And when you were describing her process, you also talked about, I'm curious if I could just to ask a follow-up on the detoxification. Like, once you got to that point, what are some methods you use when you find these metals are really high in someone? Are you targeting something to do with the liver? Is it something strictly in the gut? Is it a combination of both? Like, what does that look like? Because that's an area where I personally have never had that issue, or anyone in my family. So there's some other areas where I know very, very well, probably too much to know about, because of some issues that we kind of work through. I have some other people I work with that are pretty strong in that, but it sounds like that's an area of expertise of yourself and your team. So wonder if you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so we know from research, and we have this big chart that we pull from, that different toxins have different binding affinities with different binders. So rather than just saying charcoal grabs everything, it really
Right.
depends on what it is. And sometimes you need to upregulate phase one and phase two liver detox, like you said. Sometimes glutathione can be really helpful for that. And then other times we really need to focus on what are we binding to and grabbing and kind of soaking that up. We have weak binds and we have strong binds. So we want to avoid weak binds because, especially with metals, those can grab onto something, chelate it out from its hiding spot because your body's like, ooh, this is bad, let me hide it. We don't want to pull it out and then let go of it. So we want to make sure that we are using proper ways of escorting something out of the body. And the first thing that has to happen is you have to poop every day. If you're not pooping every day, we will not allow you to do any type of detox because you're just going to pull things out and then it's
Sure.
going to just sit in the GI tract and it's going to get reabsorbed through, it's going to sound like a fancy word, enterohepatic recirculation. All that means is your body is like, oh, that bile that I had to make to like break down and emulsify these fats, that's like kind of annoying for me to make. I don't want to make it again. Let me reuse it, and it reabsorbs it. And in the bile, a lot of toxins are stored. Mold toxins are really big at being stored in the bile, which is why we use bile sequestrants for that. From a pharmaceutical standpoint, that's going to be Welchol or cholestyramine. And then from a non-pharmaceutical standpoint, we have clay, zeolite clay, bentonite clay, charcoal. Cilantro is a really weak bind, so that's one that we try to avoid when we're doing metals. That's why I don't like when people do the, that detox shake that's out there that's
Right.
like celery and cilantro. And I'm like, but is it getting it out all the way, or are you just
Right.
pulling things out and then you're letting go of it? So we want to be really careful about what we're doing. We want to make sure it gets all the way out. So you have to be pooping. We have to use the right binders based on what we know about what helps excrete it. Some things are harder than others. Some things, it's the only research we have is hydrate really well and take more vitamin C and hope for the best and avoid it coming in again, which is another thing that I think is an important point to remember when we're talking about getting rid of toxins. We have to make sure that they're not still coming in. Otherwise, you've got a boat with a hole in it and you're sitting there and you're bailing it out, but it's still coming in. So we want to work with people on, where is this coming from? Do you need to test your water? Do you need to test your
Mm.
air? Is it in all of your beauty products? Are you slathering a bunch of endocrine disruptors all over you every day and then wondering, why are my hormones whacked? Well, we should probably stop doing that. So it's really twofold. One is stopping the influx of whatever it is. And then two is up-regulating your body's own systems and making sure we have that exit strategy through the bowels, through the urine. Sweat is also really helpful, especially for mold toxins. We have a lot of research showing that the mold can be excreted through sweat. So sauna, things like that are really helpful.
No, I mean, you made so many good points. There's a few alarms going off, so hopefully I can focus in on my questions. But good, definitely good stuff. And I will say this for those out there that are, well, detox doesn't work for me. And I've heard this, and maybe there's other people that have a different reason behind that statement. But what I've seen, several people, exactly what you're talking about, they get really sick because their body. I'm
Mhm.
assuming I'm not a physician, so I didn't confirm this, but I'm assuming they're not clearing a lot of it. Like as you're
Yeah.
mentioning, they're
Mhm.
just recirculating it, and it's out of the bile or wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
Things that I'm sure you can describe much more articulate than I can, but um, and I can speak to that, like, between that and I do recall, like, just a very, very strong smell in a friends that were in the sun, and I'm not talking like your typical, like, guy sweating smell, like,
Mhm.
just because I'm like, "Whoa, like, there is something going on that,
Mhm.
we gotta look into that a little more, bud." Like, it so I've personally, like, witnessed it several times, men, women, different ages, very fit, not as fit, just off the couch starting to do a positive lifestyle change, to high level athletes that have experienced exactly what you're describing. And so I think, again, it's yeah, it's tough for people, right? Because best of intentions, and there are some great products and applications out there or therapies out there, but man, it is just scary, when you go from research peptides to detox in a box solutions. And it's like, if you're not, if you hit the nail on the head and you just got lucky, wow, you dodged a bullet. But I've
Mhm.
seen some horrific, you know, things come from that. And just kind of, I'm sure it sounds like you've kind of had a similar experience. Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, yeah, and we get a lot of people come to us that have been hurt from other things. Either they DIY'd it and it didn't go well, or they went to someone that didn't really know what they were doing, didn't take them through all of the steps. And that's
Mhm.
why we only work in packages. So we don't let you come in and say, I'm going to see you once over here and maybe once over there,
Yeah.
because I don't want to ever have someone have more harm done to them than good. And so when we know we're going to be seeing you consistently, we can walk you through and go, okay, we're not detoxing until you're pooping every day. You're pooping every day. Great. Are you sweating every day? Okay, great. Now let's look at your phase 1 and your phase 2 liver detox and make sure like we're capturing both. Phase 1 actually takes chemicals and makes them more toxic. This is your
Mhm.
body's way of breaking it down to be able to excrete it. Phase 2 is where it then kind of packages it up and it's like, okay, now it can go. Somebody
Right.
doesn't know what they're talking about and they're taking all these phase 1 pushers and they are not focusing on phase 2 or the removal, they're going to end up so much worse. So we want people to go slow, walk their way through it, because like you said, in my experience, I've seen a lot of people come in and they've gotten so much worse from doing it by themselves or doing it wrong or not having those detox pathways open first. And there's a lot of people out there that are handing over copy and paste protocols of,
Yeah.
you have these toxins, take this. And they're not diving into, well, what has your history been with this? And what other symptoms do we have going on here? And walking them through it. And we have a message portal where clients can access everyone on their team. So that's myself and then their 2 key team members 24/7.
Mhm.
I'm not saying I'm going to answer at midnight on a Saturday night, but
Sure.
you can message us
Right.
24/7. And as
Yeah.
soon as we're able, we'll get back to you. And so if you say, "Oh, I just took this and I got a headache." We'll say, "Okay, pause on that, give it a few days. Next time, take it a half a dose, message me after." Like so we're able to really guide you through it so that it doesn't go sideways, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart approach, and it's a lot of, that patient advocacy, or that taking control of your health, because a lot of what we're saying, and just like in any profession, there's, the performers, and there's also the, underperformers, if you will, or the not so good at their roles. And it's the same in the medical field, to where on the grand scheme of things, when they're saying you're fine, they're talking like you're not at risk of some kind of, debilitating condition, or some kind of black and white diagnosis that needs drastic medical intervention. When they say fine, their definition of fine is different than what most people are using. And that's not to blame them. That's just the way the system's set up. And so I think a lot of times, what's can be frustrating, especially if it's someone you care about or someone you know, they're like, well, my doctor says I'm fine. And it's like you versus imaginary doctor. It's like, what, right. But it's almost like we're using a word that's translated different in two different
Different
languages.
definition.
Like, you're
Yep.
describing it one way, but we're meaning this, or you're
Yeah.
you're meaning this, and your doctor's meaning this. And so, yeah, that can be a challenge. But I certainly, hope that more people, continue to explore this, because I would imagine that can be the state when they're coming in to see you. I would imagine is oftentimes, would you say people are a little frustrated, maybe, or um, a little
Yeah.
burned out, because they're searching for these answers?
Yeah, and they're told it's in their head or there's nothing wrong and things like that, and I'm on I exactly agree with what you said. So there's 2 different things going on here. So we have acute care, which
Mhm.
is so necessary. If I'm in a car accident, I don't
Right.
want essential oils and homeopathy. Like I
Right.
want to go to a hospital, I want an X-ray, I want you to do surgery. Like that is so needed and it is so important and what they do is so important and valid. But that is so different from chronic cases and optimization and feeling good and being healthy. So, healthcare and sick care are very different, and
Right.
yet they're often confused. And so, people come in frustrated because they're going to sick care, but what they really want is healthcare, and they don't understand that they're different. And when their doctor says you're okay, he means you're not going to die tomorrow of a heart attack. I cleared you
Right.
for that. You're good. And that's important. And we do need that. But
Right.
you're going to get really frustrated if you keep going to the ER about your, recurrent headaches. They're just going to be like, take Tylenol, go home. Why are you here? But
Right.
we're going to dive in and see, oh, is this a thiamine or a magnesium deficiency? Or is this a food allergy that's triggering your recurrent migraines and headaches? They're completely different things and they're both needed, but you got to know where you're going and why you're going to them.
Yeah, and I think it's so spot on because I was just speaking to he's an older gentleman, and he everything's good. He's in good health, but he keeps talking about his personality is changing. Like he's short fused. He gets angry easy and quick to respond, and a lot of it he's finding because his provider said, there's some other things from a stress management standpoint. And I've encouraged him to get blood work. I was like, hey, if it's through us or through, I have a whole list of people, obviously you guys being one of them, that I would refer him to. He hasn't done it yet, but he is starting to look into, his diet and finding deficiencies in things, some basic amino acids. Theanine was something that, we said to explore magnesium, theanine, a good multi, like just not that you need a pill. It's just like he's going from a specific style of eating, and to change it overnight, it's just not going to happen. He's going to need, in my, he's not a client of mine, just a friend. Like in my uh, non-diagnostics opinion, like just some kind of help or intervention to get him a little bit of symptom relief, if you will,
Mhm.
and then kind of hopefully that encourages him to take a step. Because at the end of the day, the person has to take the step too. They have to
Yeah.
want to work through it because these are, as we mentioned earlier, right? Like these are these tests take time. You have to go through and do them and walk through it. But it's interesting. I mean, is that something you often get reported? I guess is where I was going with that story. There is, do you see difference in personality traits or responses to stresses and things of that nature um, as they're kind of working through protocols?
Yeah, one of the most reported things on the symptom survey that we start with is irritability. People
Mm,
often come to us feeling like I'm just irritable.
that's what I
And
was looking for. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, they just feel like they can't handle anything. Their fuse is really short. Their stress response is not what they know it should be. And that is really rewarding when we're able to help them see that fall away. It's very commonly moms, and they're like, I keep snapping at my kids and I don't
mhm,
want to, but I can't help it. And we're able to dive in and see, what's going on with that stress response. Sometimes they need adaptogens in the short term. Our goal is always to fix things as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then allow your body, once it's reached its new homeostasis, to do it on its own. So we're not you have to take all these pills for the rest of your life type of a practice, but we're
yeah,
going to help you fix what's broken. And then once your body is able to function together as a whole and you're absorbing your nutrients from food because your gut is fixed, well, then you don't need to take the supplement anymore because you can get it from food. But that takes time, like you said. And that is something that we very often see, is that irritability fall away. And people are so happy for that because they feel like they got their life back and their personality back and who they want to be as a person, instead of feeling like it's been hijacked.
yeah. Do you see a lot of that more? Is there anything that sticks out to your mind that's more that type of behavior or change of behavior? Maybe is a better way to phrase it, is associated with? Is there any, obviously there's going to be a lot of different things, but is there a higher percentage of maybe one or two areas that pop up more that's associated with that type of behavioral change?
Low progesterone in women
Mhm,
is going to contribute to that very commonly. Progesterone is a very calming hormone, and it can get tanked if we have overall kind of depletions going on where all of our hormones are kind of depleted. Estrogen likes to try to stay high if it can. So if we have
mhm,
estrogen is too high, which is going to make you feel a little more chaotic, and the progesterone that's going to come in and calm things down is too low, then you're not going to sleep well. You're going to feel really irritable. And that's something that can be really easily fixed short term with supplementing with progesterone, but then long term of fixing your sleep and fixing your stress and repairing your adrenals and allowing your body to, again, come back to that homeostasis on its own.
mhm. Are there other markers in relation to progesterone, just on that topic, that you like to cross-reference that are associated with progesterone, or do you primarily isolate that as kind of a focal point?
We like to use the Dutch test a lot when it
Mhm.
comes to hormones, and that gives us so many data points at once that we're able to kind of put together a pretty good picture from that. Looking at, on the chart, it starts with pregnenolone, and then that goes into progesterone, DHEA. That DHEA then goes into testosterone, which gets split into two. That's another one is we'll often see an alpha pathway preference with that testosterone, which is going to drive kind of those more like aggressive, irritable tendencies.
Yeah.
And that can then aromatize over to estrogen, which can lead to the estrogen being too high. So we can
Yeah.
see this whole trickle down effect. And that's why I really like using that test versus, and blood is valid as well, but I prefer to use this because I can see all the pathways. So if
Right.
we know in blood your estrogen's too high, we don't always know why. But if we look at the Dutch, we can see, is it over aromatizing? And we need to block that aromatization. Maybe short term, we're going to use nettles or saw palmetto, but long term, we need to work on your blood sugar balance. We need to work on your inflammation because those can drive that. Or is it low COMT methylation, which think of that like pulling up the drain in a bathtub.
Yep.
So if you don't have that drain pulled up, then it's going to just backlog up, and that might create that elevated estrogen. You might need to open up that COMT methylation. And then we can see the pathways as well, which I really like to see in women, especially. There's so much breast cancer. And we know that there's three pathways, and one is strongly correlated to breast cancer. And we
Right.
want that pathway to only be, I believe it's 7.5 to 11% when we're looking at the total breakdown of estrogen. And so if that's at 30%, we've got to lower that to lower that risk.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something I've seen a lot where even someone who is starting a therapy based on blood serum, specifically in women, I've seen it more than men. But and they did not have the, to use your analogy, right? Like the drain pulled up, right? The plug, if you will, was still in the drain.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
then they're taking, say, a testosterone therapy. They had low estrogen, but yet they're presenting estrogen dominant symptoms. And you're kind of like, well, why is that? And it's, well, if you're not clearing that,
Yeah.
at some point it's going to be, higher at different phases, obviously. But it's important to look at all the above. Now, do you usually do, like, which is there one you prefer over the other, or do you, I guess, let me ask a more general question. Do you use cycle mapping with the Dutch sometimes, or do you prefer the complete, or how do you usually approach that?
We don't use cycle mapping as much. No one wants to do it. It's a lot of
I've
work.
heard that. Yeah, I've heard that from a few people I've asked that question to. They said that they just find people just don't want to go through and basically
Yeah.
pee on a stick for
I
28
mean,
days.
yeah, the Dutch on its own is a bit of a pain. You're having to restrict fluids the day before. You have to avoid avocados because that's going to throw off the dopamine markers. You have to restrict caffeine the day of. Uh, People barely want to do that one. So we stop at that. Now, if someone is having long-standing fertility issues, cycle mapping can be really valuable for that. If we really want to
Mhm.
see, are you having the peaks and the surges when you're supposed to, or are you thinking you're ovulating when you're not because that's not lining up? So occasionally we'll use it, but rarely because no one wants to do that.
Sure. No, appreciate that. I've heard that quite a few times to where, it's definitely, yeah, that's like the test that never ends, right? So it's
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, it's ongoing, but I have seen some interesting data points where someone thought I was like a magician because I'm like, oh, you bleed at this point and then it comes back and then this, and they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, it's right here in a graph. It's
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not that really didn't, I'm not that bright. I can read a color coordinated map though. So, so it really pops for you. But um no, and so I did want to kind of shift back to some more. I know we really zoomed in just to kind of zoom out more on the mindset of someone coming in. You create a lot of good, applicable, science-based content. So it's maybe doesn't go viral because it's not as catchy and get a bunch of, some nonsense tied to it of something you
Mhm.
just made up. Um, but I am curious to like the mindset of people when they come in to see you, and maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing, one or two myths in, let's say, women's health that you just wish would die and go away. Like, what are some things that are, being brought to you a lot in these consultations that you're like, oh, geez.
Following the trendy things and the science that was only tested on men. I
Yeah.
wish that would go away. Um, things like intermittent fasting and cold plunging. There's so many things that have been really well studied in men, but women are so difficult to study because their hormones impacted. There's so many variables that it's such an untapped market and so poorly researched. And so women will come in because they saw this viral video about, well, if
Mm,
I do XYZ every day, I'm going to lose weight. And they're doing tons of cardio, they're doing tons of HIIT, they're doing fasted HIIT, and then they're cold plunging. And they like can barely even move. They're so tired. And we will run a panel and we're like, your adrenals are shot. You are making zero cortisol over here. Like, are you okay? And they're like, no. So I wish people would stop following like the viral, trendy stuff that's not applicable to women. And you have to really dive in. And there's even headlines of papers are often wrong. I have friends all the time sending me stuff and they're like, this person says this, meat is bad or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's unpack this. Let's read the abstract. Let's read the study together. And I swear, whoever wrote this, like, I don't even think they read the abstract. And really,
right.
to understand something, you need to read the whole paper, right? But at
Right.
least read the darn abstract. But it's like they're just making stuff up and putting this headline and putting that out. And then people are reading it and that's going viral. And then everyone's confused. And nutrition research is hard enough as it is because you
Right.
can't lock somebody in a closet for 10
Right.
years and be like, you can only eat this and you can't go
That's
anywhere or
it.
do anything.
Right.
So it is very confusing. And because of that, there's a lot of myths, like you said, that people are just kind of reading the headline and they're not going deep enough to truly understand what is behind it. Is this applicable to me or is it not? And it's not even just with gender, there's so many other things. There's genetics, which is huge and no one's understanding that. There's age, there's, are you in menopause or not? So there's so much more that goes into, should I be doing this? And so I wish people would stop just following the headlines.
Well, and it's true because like I pulled this up while you were talking because I wanted to reference it. So I'll just read a couple fat little bullet points here. 1960s, 1970s, NIH funded trials use health male medical students as stand-ins, even for diseases that primarily impacted women. Women were banned from early phase trials by the FDA in 1977. 8 out of 10 drugs withdrawn from the US market between 1997 and 2000 posed greater health risks to women than men. Let's see, is there another one? Oh, finally in 1993, there was a NIH Revitalization Act of 1993 finally mandated women's inclusion, but enforcement was very weak. And it goes on and on and on. And there's a bunch of other stats, but it's like
Crazy.
some of these things we're referencing that have been studied in men from even like the 30s.
Yeah.
There's 10 years of research from women, and I think also from a nutrition standpoint, I wish I could like put $1 million ad behind like this one statement where it's like, unless they're in a metabolic ward, like you can't control everything. So you have to read whatever you're reading with that lens, like knowing
Yeah.
you got to kind of be suspicious when you're reading, at least in my opinion, to where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, did they really do that? And then you see studies where I forget the exact stat. It's something like, 40%, 60% miss reporting of caloric intake, and these massive like differences where, not that the people were ill-intended in trying to throw off researchers, they had the best of intentions, but they still were that far off.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the nutrition study space, when someone, a good red flag is if someone's saying this equals this and it's related to nutrition, reason for pause. There's
Yeah.
probably I can't even count. There's I can't even think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there might be a couple, but there's not really many like solid black and white, that simplistic.
Yeah.
The old argument of causation versus correlation, right? It's like yeah. Anyways, I can go on a rant for
Yeah,
too long,
I
but I won't.
believe strongly that there's no one size fits all diet. I think it
Yes.
needs to be individualized to your activity levels and what you're doing and your genetics and your lifestyle and your medical history and your everything. There's so much. And so I always tell people, if somebody is out there screaming, everyone needs to eat this way and buy my one diet book and everyone should eat this way, run in the other
Right.
direction because
Right.
there is no one size fits all. We're all
Right.
so different. If you study genetics for 5 seconds, you can understand how different we all are and the importance of epigenetics and nutrigenomics. I took a bunch of classes on that in grad school, and it's, I mean, so deep.
Yeah. No, for sure. So what are maybe other uh you know tips, suggestions? Like what would be like one good self-regulating thing for women, let's start with specifically, maybe if you had to pick one or two of, hey, you should kind of pause and think about this, what it was, maybe a symptom or a feeling or whatever comes to mind. I'm just curious for those out there, like a tip or something maybe to say, yeah, I might want to look into this more.
Fatigue in any way, shape, or form. So if you don't feel like you can easily wake up in the morning, go through the whole day without needing a nap or reaching for multiple cups of coffee, and you don't feel like you can make it until an appropriate bedtime, maybe 9 o'clock. If you start getting tired, perfect. Should be able to wake up at 6 easily. If you can't do that and get through a day like that, then something deeper is going on. And maybe it's thyroid, or maybe it's iron, or maybe it's your gut, or maybe it's a food sensitivity. There's so many different things, but you should be able to get up, feel energetic, get through your whole day without dips, without crashes. Blood sugar imbalance is another one that causes a lot of crashes.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do that, don't let anyone convince you, oh, it's because you're busy. Oh, it's because you're a mom. Oh, it's because
Yeah.
you have kids. Like, that's not normal. You should be able to be a busy mom with kids and a job or whatever you want to do and not fall asleep at your desk at 2 o'clock and not feel
Right.
like 6 o'clock at night you can barely get through dinner because you're falling asleep or have to chug coffee all day. None of that is normal. And I meet people time and time and time and time again that they think it's normal, or they were told it's normal, or their doctor told them it's normal, or their friends told them it's normal. That's not normal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, to your point, like it's busy to one, maybe busy to another. Because I've often, I've always looked at like, well, if someone fill in the blank can do this and they seem to be functioning fine, why can't I? Right? Not meaning that every person should be able to do what the next person can. Obviously, I think you
Mhm,
mentioned your husband played in the NBA. Not
mhm.
a chance. I don't think I made my eighth grade basketball team. So like, not a chance. I can't do what he did. But as far as just, I would look at, maybe it's if it's a business leader, politician, great family man, blah blah, whatever the case is, I'm like, that person's really busy, whatever. So there's got to be something there missing if I can't do that, or like physically can't feel like I'm doing that. There has to be something missing to look at that. And so it's good reason for pause and reflection. But I think it's also a good point that you mentioned, there's how they're feeling. But I think if a lot of people around you are telling you, if you're hearing the word normal a lot, that could be a red flag of like, oh, I had
Mhm,
17 people say the way I'm feeling is normal. Maybe I might want to check to see if it actually is. It's kind of
mhm,
counterintuitive, but
mhm.
it's yeah, just to kind of pause and look into that.
And there's a lot of confusion between the word common and normal too, I should say
Yeah.
that. So just because something's common doesn't mean it's normal. So somebody might say normal, but what they really mean is common. They really
Yeah.
mean we're all depleted, we're all tired. That
Right.
doesn't make
That's a
it
great
good.
point.
That doesn't
No,
make it optimal or normal.
no, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, like what do you mean by the words you're using, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a great point. I did want to just touch a little bit on pediatrics, kids. I recently was talking to a mom where her son is, there's some concern about, and I see this a lot because I volunteer with a local football program, and a lot of kids, like, they didn't hit puberty yet, they're not growing as much, things of that nature. Um, Wherever you're comfortable and most would like to dive into that, because you mentioned yourself when you're younger, you mentioned your children, and then I know you have people on your team and yourself that work with everyone from pediatrics to the youth. What are some common issues you're seeing in just youth help, as they're going through these stages in life and changes? Are there any common threads that you see as either reason for pause or things of that nature that are kind of coming up more and more in your practice?
Yeah, our world is so toxic. It's the amount of food dyes and pesticides and everything, and then toxins in children's toys, and then mold in their schools and things like that. So I'm seeing toxins really deeply impact kids' health. And gut health is also really integral to that. And sometimes they're related and interconnected, and sometimes it's one or the other. But those are two areas that I see a lot coming back when in the kids that we're working with. We had some children; they were twins actually that we were working with that. They had some of the highest levels of mold that I've ever seen, and a lot of behavioral issues. So it looks different in kids. So that's another thing, is it can be hard for parents to pinpoint, and they might be told, get a therapist, or just parent better. And it's not a parenting issue or a behavioral issue. It's the kid is sick, but they don't understand what's going on and their feelings, and so they'll act out. So these kids had a lot of behavioral issues, like biting and hitting and kicking and almost being kicked out of school and things like that. And we saw these really high levels of mold, and were able to target them using zeolite and bentonite and things like that, and help reduce those high levels. And the mom actually ended up changing schools for them to keep them away from that influx of it. And then they had a lot of gut issues, so we had to work on that. And they were pretty picky eaters. So luckily, my dietitian and my pediatric practitioner are amazing at working with picky eaters and picky kids, and finding, how can we sneak things into smoothies to get their nutrition up, and how can we sneak maybe a little bit of gut healing tinctures into their juice that they're drinking to heal their gut. And they've seen a dramatic change in their behavior. They're sleeping through the night now. There's no more outbursts. This is a total side note, but we're also seeing a lot more, and it's probably because of the information I'm putting out there. I'm drawing this in, but a lot of PANS and PANDAS, which is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep for the PANDAS, or PANS is just pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome, and it's infectious driven, and these kids have inflammation in their brain. It's autoimmune encephalitis, and that's going to create a ton of behavioral issues and bedwetting and handwriting regression. And often it's looked at as, this is a bad kid. And you can reduce that inflammation, find the infectious trigger. And sometimes that's working with a pediatrician and getting them on antibiotics, or other times it's herbs. But just so much behavioral issues is what we see in kids that are from a deeper physiological issue. It's not just psychological. It's not just parenting. They don't need more timeouts. There's something actually wrong.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious too, and admittedly, like I said, I'm not a practitioner, so I'm not really hands-on with this. I'm just curious, are there different like, how do I want to frame this? Because I have two questions. I guess it'd be on a GI map or a gut health test, and then also with toxins. A two-part question. One is, are there different ranges on those scales if they're under 18, or is it kind of the same? Is my first question. And my second question is if there's different testing you would do with, say, a child or, minor versus adults under that umbrella. Are there different things there? I'm just kind of curious to your approach there.
So blood work, we definitely have pediatric ranges, but then the functional labs, they're really not putting out pediatric ranges. So a GI map or a toxin panel, there's not any different ranges that we're given to go off of. And I haven't found like a need for it. So far, everything's been kind of the same with adults, and correlates with their symptom presentation and then symptom reduction. When the labs are getting better, the symptoms are getting better. We don't have to do as much to quote unquote fix kids because they're so resilient. These issues have typically been going on for 2 years instead of 20. So you can fix that so much easier. It's usually just these little tweaks, and they're feeling markedly better, especially more mild cases. In sometimes it's a few weeks, sometimes it's a few months, but it's not typically this like big arduous thing with these huge, massive protocols. It's little tweaks, and their bodies are so resilient. It's amazing. And HTMA, or hair tissue mineral analysis, is something that we'll use more often with kids than with adults. And mineral balancing is also something that's been really helpful behaviorally. We know from research, I think it was part of the Southampton 6 study, that red dye chelates zinc from kids' brains, and then they're more apt to have these ADHD symptoms. And so if we see that the zinc is low, maybe the copper is too high, and the zinc and copper are competing for binding sites, that can help kind of strategically balance minerals, and then that can help behaviorally and help them be able to pay better attention at school and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you brought up. And I know this is like a really fine detail you just mentioned there, but working with someone who understands exactly what you just said, that if two things are fighting for the same receptor site and one is extremely high, then it's possible that the other one is not getting home and causing some of those issues. Because I think that's, and right, like your general practitioner, like they may or may not know that, but that doesn't mean they're inherently bad. It's just you got to dig deeper, I guess is my point in bringing that up, and understand that. And even nowadays with AI and Google, not that you should be diagnosing it, but if you want to find out some general information, you could just say, this is really high. Is there anything I should look into further, or ask questions
Mhm.
to a professional about, and get some
Yeah.
kind of answers there? Because yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm reminded of one of the young boys I was talking to, his mom, and it was best of intentions, but like also because I was familiar with some of the supplements she was trying to use, it was funny because she's like, I can't get him to drink this. I'm like, well, how are you giving it to him? It tastes pretty good. And she was blending these three together, and
Oh,
like, I'm like, tastes horrible. I
yeah.
was like, I don't blame him. Like, you have like, I think his favorite drink was like apple juice, and then there was something, I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'm like, man, that with apple juice, oh, like, just give it to him separate. Like, I was like, this poor kid. But she's like, oh, okay. She's like, I just was like thinking there's something wrong with him. I'm like, no, that
Yeah.
tastes like crap. That's all
Yeah. Yeah.
it is. Like, it's all good. You just got to deliver it different. And so, yeah, I was just reminded of some of that, because I would imagine too, as you mentioned with like picky eaters, it's got to be someone, like your team who understands that, because a lot of my original background with nutrition was more performance related. It's more, I'll do whatever it takes, coach. How do I do it? To where dealing with someone who's more picky, not that there's not a solution there. It's just not going to be, back when I used to do that, would not have been in my wheelhouse. I definitely would have referred out, because, yeah, I'm not going to have as many scenarios there. With kids, do you find that a lot of times it's like changing things dietarily, maybe? I'm trying to think how to frame this, but like more than with adults, is it generally like, um, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you try to stay away from outside interventions as far as like supplements or solution in a pill? And I say that not to say it's a bad solution in a pill.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need those things to get some kind of relief.
Yeah.
Do you find that you're working that more into nutrition, the actual food they're intaking, or if you're using some supplements? I guess the second part of the question would be, what are some of your go-tos, generally speaking?
Yeah. I feel like I can't answer the go-to one because we so
So
individualize
different. Yeah,
everything.
fair enough.
And Christy is our pediatric specialist, and she's great at figuring out what is not only the right supplement or intervention for what we're seeing in the labs, but also for that kid. Do they like to do little shots of, we can put together tinctures, or are they like no to that and we want powders to go into the shakes? And so she's really good at customizing and figuring out all of that. She has young kids herself. So my kids are all older. I have a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 15-year-old. I'm like, I barely remember those years, but she's got little ones where she's like, okay, so with my kid, we did this and we added this to it, and then they drank it. So she is fantastic at figuring out all of that. And we try not to use a lot of supplemental interventions. Like you said, we'll keep it as minimal as possible, because kids are easier to fix. We don't have to. We're able to do a few dietary tweaks here and there, and then a few really short-term protocols. And then maybe when we're done, we have them on a good quality multi with some D3 if we find that their D tends to run low, because not only is the sun a factor in that, but there's genetics. There's a gene called VDR-TAC, and if you have that, it's harder to keep your vitamin D levels as high as we want them to be. So again, depending on the person, we'll use as little as possible with kiddos, but we do still use supplements with them. And Christy's good at figuring out what are we going to use for how long, and we try to keep it short term and like sneak it in there. She worked with one brother and sister team, and the little girl loved taking her supplements for some reason. So she would go up to the mom and be like, it's time for my supplements. So every kid is different, but I think she recognized they made her feel better. She's only 4 years old, but she was like, I feel better doing this. So she would go up to
Yeah.
mom and be like, don't forget my supplements. And so mom's like, okay, here's your vitamins.
Yeah, I think just for those lists that are watching this, obviously, we'll put a lot of this in the show notes for audio. But we're talking about, is it Christy right here
Yep.
you're referencing?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep.
So,
Unfortunately, everyone on my team has the same name. So we have a
yeah, that's true.
dietitian, Christy. We have our pediatrics, Christy. We have Christine. We have me, Kristen. And then Carrie is not exactly the same, but it still is a K. So I
Yeah,
apologize for everyone that tries to work with us and they're like, wait, who, what? But we send out postcards with the pictures on it. So people can
make the
start to
connection.
make that connection. Yeah.
There
But
you
you're
go.
right. Christy Krezel is our pediatrics.
Nice, nice. No, and yeah, it's funny. We had 2 generations of Jays in my family, so that's I can somewhat relate, because it was like, "Wait a minute, you guys are all Jays?" Like, "Yeah, it was accident," and actually, on my dad's side, it was all Jays as well, and it's funny because 'cause we'd ask, like, my grandma, whatever, she's like, "No, I just like those names and just so happened that's how everything fell into place," but, um well, no, I really appreciate you coming on here, and we're gonna have a lot of information, in the show notes, where to find you, how to engage with some of your content. But curious if you wouldn't mind just kind of for those maybe listening on audio, maybe they're driving, could you kind of share a little bit of where people can find you, interact with you, maybe some different resources you have, things of that nature?
Yeah. So I'm really active on Instagram. So that's a great place to go, consume some content, learn a little bit more about what we're about. And then we can have a conversation over there as well in the DMs. I'm very active over there. So it's at Kristen Blake Wellness. And all of my channels are at Kristen Blake Wellness. So I also have a YouTube channel that I haven't posted on in forever, but there is like 70 videos on there. So that's another place that you can wander around and get to see some videos and things. And then my website is the same, kristenblakewellness.com. Facebook, Kristen Blake Wellness. So it's the same everywhere, which keeps it nice and simple. And on my website, there is a services tab, and that details out all of the different ways that you can work with us. So our main things are going to be those packages where we're able to come alongside you for 3 to 6 months. We do have shorter packages as well, like a testing package where it's one test and 2 appointments to dive into that and work on that. So the pediatrics packages are on there as well. So everything is going to be on that services tab on kristenblakewellness.com. And then we have an application. So everywhere on the website and on my Instagram and everywhere you'll see, click here to book a call with me. You're going to fill out a brief application so I can see, is this in my wheelhouse? There's, certain things that we don't work with. If someone has active cancer and they're looking for holistic cancer treatment, we know nothing about that. And I will say, we're not a great fit for your call, but if I know someone in your area, I might refer you. So once I see that application, if we're a good fit, then we get on a call, and that's where I get to dive in, learn more about you, your case, what's going on, and come up with what do I think is going to be the most impactful test for you, the most impactful team to come alongside you, and what would that look like to work with us. I also have a blog. I have a bunch of free downloadable resources on a resources tab. I have a thyroid guide. I have a SIBO guide. I have a gut healing guide. So there's a lot of information that I've put out over the past 10 years that's available pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's great because I think, a lot of those, guides, resources, and for those not watching on video, I was pulling up there's a resources tab where, as Kristen's mentioning, she has her podcast, blog, YouTube, Instagram, and a bunch of those resource guides. But I think for those people too, where you're like, "Hey, not really ready to commit," but she said some things that got my attention, got the wheels turning. Check out some free guides. Like, it doesn't hurt, read
Mhm.
some things and then compare and contrast. Maybe you go to a couple other accounts and a lot of us are using I know for us with a lot of different therapies and things we do, we'll do a lot of free guides through just Instagram prompts where if they say,
Yep.
magnesium, they get a magnesium guide.
Yep.
Is it a prescription diagnosis? No, it's just educating you on the different types of magnesium. Some get you a little more in the ballpark of understanding like what is going on versus,
Yeah.
hey, I bought this magnesium in Costco, and it's like, great, you bought the wrong one. Awesome.
Yes.
So,
Everyone takes the wrong one. Yes.
yes, yes. Well, and it makes sense, right? And I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent, but it's like, I get it. You saw the one for $14 and one for $60, and you bought the 14. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
exaggerating, but it's like there's a reason why this one's more because of how it's formulated, blah
Mhm.
blah. So, no, I really do though appreciate all that you're doing. A lot of great content. When we were just getting first optimal going, there was a couple of people, your account was one of them, that I really liked the content and followed myself personally and just kind of gave some good inspirations and information. So I would encourage everybody out there to definitely check out Kristen, her team, and all the information. So thanks again for joining us today. I know you got a packed schedule helping people and all that good stuff, but it's always great to have someone like yourself on and just share some good knowledge for those out there.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with you today.
Awesome. Well, for everybody out there, just remember, like, comment, share, all that fun stuff. But definitely, if you have questions, you can send them in. You can engage with us on social media or through the First Optimal podcast. We'll do our best to answer those questions, but something specific to Chris and her team, I'll gladly shoot it over her way, or point you in a direction to some of her content to get the answers you're looking for. But thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you. Take care.